Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bob Clifford and Senior Partner of Clifford Law Offices in Chicago. This is now our 15th year of presenting this program. We're very proud to do so once again. It's a quality program offering 2 hours of free continuing legal education, professional responsibility education for credit. We have nearly 5,000 lawyers who are registered from across 3 different states in what is believed to be the largest program of its kind in the country. So I am very grateful not only to our participants, but also to each and every one of you for your strong interest in this material. Today we present 2 1-hour programs for your consideration, one on the importance of wellness, and the second hour is on the important topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I will quickly introduce our 2 panels. I think you can all see them all on the screen, and we will then begin our full 2 hours. To discuss the substance of the section on mind, body, and soul, defining well-being in the law, and also the weathering effect, you can find the full bios of the presenters in the program materials that you received upon registration. Our first panel today on wellness includes a partner at Clifford Law Offices, who happens to be my daughter, Erin Clifford, who is founder and CEO of Erin Clifford Wellness. Erin is also joined by Brian Cuban from Texas, who's a well-known lawyer and author of The Addicted Lawyer. Also serving on the first panel is David Shaheed. Judge Shaheed, thank you so much, sir, for being with us. He is currently an associate professor at Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs. And last but of course not least, returning by popular demand is our friend Tracy Kepler, who's CNA's Risk Control Director and former director of the ABA Center for Professional Responsibility. Welcome all of you. Our second panel consists of 3 people who are highly respected in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the profession. They are Lindsey Draper, who has held many positions, including former Milwaukee County Assistant District Attorney, and currently is Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Institute of Wellbeing in Law. Then Leslie Davis, a CEO of the National Association of Minority and Women Owner Law Firms, also known as NAMWOLF. And then Lea Gutierrez, a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Again, good afternoon to you all, and thank you for being with us. We encourage the thousands of you who have joined us today to ask questions to the group that will be watching. They are otherwise you are muted. So to send your questions, you do so in writing as you were instructed in the program materials, and we will try to answer as many as we can, but we do strongly encourage the questions from each of you. There are materials accompanying the program, and I think that you've received those electronically with the registration. If for any reason you have not, please send a message on the board here. If in an emergency, you can call my office, 312-899-9090. We will be asking a series of polling questions. Those have been very popular in the past, and you can submit your answers to those questions by using your phone. Visit PollEV, that's POLLEV.com/Clifford Law to respond from your computer, or use your cell phone to text it. You text it to 22333 to join the polling question slides, and then you can text the answer to each slide that comes up. So as many of you know, I've been committed to raising the quality of the practice of law in our state, as well as others who are working side by side, others who are like-minded. And we do so by promoting civility, by the work of the Inns of Court, and the goodwill among lawyers. And I hope that today's timely program achieves those goals and is another step in that direction. So without further ado, I would like to ask our first panelist to join us for a discussion on wellness. So Pam and others, there we go. We will stay focused on our wellness panel right now. And as we start, we will show these slides on the screen. We will start with a hypothetical that is one of the important ones for us to be talking about. So we will be love spending some time together. Let me bring up this hypothetical. Christine is friends with many of her colleagues at the firm, and they love spending time together socially. But however, the activities seem to involve always around drinking. Christine is trying to cut back on her alcohol intake, but often feels pressured by her colleagues to have multiple boozy beverages in a single evening. Hey, we've had a tough day. Let's go down to the bar in the basement of the first level of the building. What should Christine do? And I believe that the next slide will show you that there are some options for Christine. And this is one of our hypotheticals, and it's a poll. So should she have an honest conversation with her colleagues and offer to plan collegial activities that do not involve and are not around alcohol? Or should she discuss her situation with human resources or her supervisor? Should she seek new employment? Should she report her colleagues to the ARDC, the Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission? So let me call upon our panelists. So how about Erin Clifford? What do you think about that?
Well, I think in this situation that Christine should have an honest conversation with her colleagues and see if they can plan some activities that are not around alcohol. You know, when I think about lawyer events, a lot of times we focus things around kind of the party, but I would suggest instead, what's the focal point of the event? Whether it's getting together in this situation after work with your colleagues to network, to form friendships, if you're going to a bar group to network, or perhaps you're going to support a cause. So instead, making that the focal point where the alcohol is sort of the side note. And another thing that I would suggest is in terms of planning activities, I'm getting invited to a lot of things by lawyers that are exercise classes or cooking classes. The CBA Young Lawyer section is actually doing this year for their fundraiser, Most Fit Lawyer. So they're really centering the activities around something other than the alcohol or the food. And I would also suggest that everybody just stays on their side of the street, if you will. So if you go to an event and you don't want to partake in any kind of drinking or anything like that, then, you know, that should be okay. And we shouldn't be pressuring our colleagues. I often get asked when I go to events, some attorneys will come up to me because they all know that I'm like the wellness person and say, hey, I've had a couple of these this week and I really don't want to drink. And I'm not sure what to do about it because I feel pressured. So if we can, as a community, let everybody stay in their lane and really center these events around what they're supposed to be about, the collegiality, the networking, and the cause.
Brian, what do you think? Brian Cuban, what would they do in Texas on this?
What will we do in Texas? Well, go out and have a beer. No, I'm just kidding. Following up on what Erin said, I think it's important for people to understand what their own triggers are going in. The worst things that I usually see bad things happen is when someone goes in ad hoc. I'll just deal with it when I'm there. Understand what your boundaries are, understand what your triggers are, and actually you can even write out the conversation you want to have, saying here are other things we want to do. Because remember, pressure comes from within. They're not your colleagues aren't necessarily trying to pressure you. They're doing things that they consider fun, because not everyone in the profession has a drinking issue. Not everyone in the profession is uncomfortable around alcohol. So I think a lawyer should take stock of what his or her boundaries are, what his or her triggers are, and even just write out a script with different things to do. And let the colleagues know that maybe we can be a little more diverse in the things we choose.
So Pam and Joe, can you tell us what the poll is showing?
We've got 92% have chosen A, 6% have chosen B.
A once again is,
Have an honest conversation.
there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and 6% chose B, go to HR. You know, it really is remarkable. There are a lot of folks who, whether you feel you have a substance problem or you're just trying to lose weight, no one really wants to say, yeah, I'd love to get together for you with work. What's wrong with ordering a club soda with cranberry juice and lemon, right? I mean, maybe.
And Bob, to your point, and this is Tracy, and just something to add into this, you know, in this situation, Christine isn't drinking because she wants to cut back. And I think this really ties in nicely with the second hour in that there are a whole host of reasons why someone may not want to drink. It could be a religious reason. It could be, you know, a health reason. Maybe there's an allergy. And I like to think of it as an inclusive sort of issue, where if alcohol is the main focus and it's a group or a law firm event or a social event where you're trying to bring people in, aren't you really maybe even excluding some people based on the focus being the drink? And so it's just something to consider from that perspective as well.
There you
And
go.
following up on what Tracy says, no one owes anyone an explanation for why they don't want to drink. What I see is we pressure ourselves and we project out what they're thinking, right? Oh, they're going to think this is going on, or they're going to think that's going on. It's okay just to say, I'm not drinking. Now, for me, obviously, I'm in recovery, very outgoing, and I'll say I'm in recovery. But there's stigma within our profession, and people may not want to do that.
Right.
Write out what your reasons are. If you think that's going to be an issue walking in, have a preset reason. And I don't think you owe any more than that.
You don't. Let's go on to thank you for those things. Let's go on to the next hypothetical. During the pandemic, Derek was injured in a car crash. You know, the plaintiff's lawyer in me hates saying the car accident, right? Was it really an accident? I think someone violated the standard of care of automobile activity. I digress, sorry. Okay, Derek was injured in a car accident, was given opioids to treat his pain. Since everyone in his office has now returned to the office, Cindy has often observed him trying to discreetly sneak pills. He also smells like alcohol when he arrives to work on most mornings. She's worried that he has a substance abuse problem and that is impacting his health and performance at work. What should Cindy do? Here's our poll. Should she have an honest conversation with Derek and offer to help him seek assistance with the lawyer's assistance program that's lapsed for you Illinois lawyers? Should he report Derek to HR or his supervisor? Should he do nothing? It is not her business. Or should she report Derek to the Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission before a serious malpractice issue arrives? That's our poll, but let me call on Tracy for this one. You know, tell me about liability issues that are associated. People from CNA must be going nuts about stuff like this.
Well, you know, it is a very interesting question from not only a lawyer's professional liability perspective, but also from an 8.3A, a reporting to discipline perspective. And so, you know, where I would go with this, you know, is really sort of, I'm going to take a step back. And I think some people who see our friends, our colleagues in this space are so afraid to do anything. They say things like, you know, is this really any of my business? Or I really want to help, but I don't want to get involved. What about the firm's reputation? And to your point, Bob, what about, do I have an ethical duty to report? Could this become a potential claim if there's harm to clients or clients matters? Sometimes people even, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, anyone feel free, Brian, to weigh in here.
Sure.
Really, I was going to ask Judge as well what he thought.
Well, I'll weigh in. I mean, from my standpoint, one, this is clearly an issue where I would be on the phone to whether it's Texas or Illinois, wherever, to the lawyer's assistance program, however it's, you know, whatever it's called in that jurisdiction. What the problem we run into, and I've seen this in Texas, I was on the advisory board for the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program, is a lot of lawyers believe that one, they have to give their name to report, and it's going to get back to them that they're the ones who ratted them out. Two, that the Lawyers Assistance Program is an arm of the state bar, and that in itself is a disciplinary issue. Neither are true in Texas, and I'm sure it's the same.
Well, let me ask you a question in that regard. Are the programs set up, and maybe Tracy knows this for Illinois and elsewhere, but is there a tip line that's an anonymous thing where I could say, hey, I'm just calling, I'm a lawyer who appeared in court last week with John Smith on the other side, and he's a good lawyer, but I got to tell you, he really was a little tipsy. He's got a problem, and maybe somebody ought to reach out to the leadership in his law firm to bring it to their attention.
Texas, you can do that.
Is that happening?
Yes, in Texas it is.
Tracy?
And in Illinois it is too. Our good friends, Dr. Diana and Tony Passioni, and the whole staff at Illinois LAP, are available for those types of phone calls. And if you hear nothing else about the LAP from Brian or me, it's 100% confidential. They are there to save lives, to help Illinois lawyers, judges, law students, and their families who are concerned about these problems, whether it be the opioid problem that we see in the hypothetical, alcohol abuse, stress-related issues, cognitive impairments, whatever it is. And they have a whole host of services in addition to, someone that you can talk to anonymously, individual and group therapy, assessments, education, peer supports, and interventions. It's a broad brush approach at the Illinois LAP and LAP.
Bob, could I just say something on this one? Because this one is one that is very close to home, because there are two examples I can think of. The first comment I would want to make is between choice A and D, that being contact the Lawyers Assistance Program or contact the Disciplinary Commission. We understand the importance of Professional Rule 3.8, but one of the things about when you contact the Disciplinary Commission, the training of the people at the Disciplinary Commission, they're litigators, and they're primarily interested in making sure that there are not impaired people practicing law. The focus with respect to the Lawyers Assistance Program is helping lawyers, plus there are volunteers that are trained. I can give two examples very briefly of how I was asked by the LAP in our state to reach out to a couple of lawyers. One, there was a call from a lawyer's wife that said that he was impaired, not really up to practicing law. I went out and talked to him. He said everything was all right. It was just an ugly divorce, and everything was okay. Unfortunately, about 2 years later, he did have a disciplinary complaint and ended up on probation, and I kind of supervised that probation. Also, with respect to the opioid issue, that's a growing problem. We know the litigation is going on with respect to the opioid industry. There was a judicial officer in our court system who had a mastectomy, became addicted to opioids. One of the colleagues contacted JLAB. JLAB had a volunteer talk with her, and she ended up leaving her judicial appointment, but it avoided the problem of her being embarrassed by some unfortunate incident in court that would have had put a blemish on the whole judicial system. So I would join with Mr. Cuban with respect to contact the LAP. They're the best equipped to help lawyers, law students, as well as judges.
And I want to add one more thing, and it's going to depend on the firm, obviously, the size of the firm. If there's an EAP, you can also, you're concerned about liability. If there's an EAP, those are confidential as well, right? At least in my experience, an employees assistance program within the firm, and you see that more in bigger firms. But you can do that as well as the lawyers assistance program.
Well, you made an interesting comment, and I really was going to move on, but I want to follow up on that. Would it be advisable for a firm, and maybe this is something that LAP and others could develop, that the firm have a program of some kind where the firm proactively tells its lawyers, hey, if you've got a problem, call this number. And you know, I confess, we don't do that at Clifford Law, but no reason why we couldn't. Why wouldn't we?
I'll answer that real quickly. If you, within the AM law, you have the ABA pledge, right? You have the
Yes.
ABA wellness pledge, and it's mostly AM law that's involved with that, a lot of bigger corporations and such. But that is really the exact purpose of that, to put into place systems in place within these law firms where lawyers feel empowered and less shameful and stigmatized about going to the firm, using those, using that system to help themselves or help another lawyer. So we are seeing that.
So here's an interesting one. Tracy, is CNA going to give me a discount on my legal malpractice insurance if I implement? Come on, I'm serious. If we implement all these programs?
It's really interesting that you raised that question, because in the National Task Force report that came out, in 2016, one of the recommendations for professional liability carriers was, let's look at it from an underwriting perspective. Let's look at it from a claims perspective. We offer, insurers, not CNA, but insurers offer discounts, premium discounts for attending trainings, for having engagement letters, for having conflicts and calendaring. Why not for having, do you pay attention to well-being? Do you have proactive impairment policies in place? Do you have education and training around these issues? And maybe it's something that is, we collect data. As many of you know, the ABA every 4 years collects all kinds of anonymized data on claims from insurers across the country, the Standing Committee on Lawyers' Professional Liability. Why not have some of that data that carriers may be keeping put in that as well, so we can see where we are and we can see where we need to go. And to Bob's point, maybe a premium credit, additional credit around well-being issues.
And I encourage everyone interested in these issues to read the task force report.
Yeah.
You may or may not agree with everything in it, but there are good risk reduction strategies.
This is like Nate from State Farm. He's out there, him and Aaron Rodgers giving you a good driver discount. I think if a law firm has a program like this, that I ought to be getting a discount from my legal mal insurer, right? Tracy, you could do something very, helpful here to all the lawyers. You could come up with a program for CNA and be the industry leader on this. We'll all switch carriers and we'll jump on board with CNA. How's that? Erin, I know you see a lot of this, Erin, in the clinical setting that you're involved in. Tell us, anecdotally, or can you share what are your observations about this? By the way, over 80%, I think 85% of the poll gave answer A. Have a conversation there. Erin?
One thing that I would say is I'm currently working at a treatment center with a lot of attorneys, and everybody who's there wants to come back to their livelihood. And many of them are fortunate that I'm currently working with, that they're at firms where they were allowed to take a leave of absence. And they're going to be allowed to come back with even some accommodations being made. And I come at this from a medical model. Like if we had an attorney that had a heart attack or had cancer, we would support that. We would want them to take a leave and get treatment and help them when they came back. And I would really like to create that kind of atmosphere in our community as lawyers and our law firms, because these are just people that are struggling. There might be people on this call that are struggling, right? So, and I think with the pandemic, we're going to have more attorneys that not only do they have substance misuse disorders, but they have depression, anxiety, suicide ideation, and we really need to rally together to destigmatize it and support each other.
And we already know that we're seeing that, right, Erin, from the recent survey from the, from the DC and LA bar that covered part of the California bar that covered part of the pandemic, where we know we are seeing the uptick during the pandemic.
Okay.
And just to, Brian, that study, it came out in May 2021, and I think we have a link to it in the resources. It's called Stress, Drink, Leave, an examination of gender-specific risk factors for mental health problems and attrition among licensed attorneys. Long title, but it covers a wide area, and it also includes COVID-related data. Not only, roughly half of the lawyers who responded are experiencing symptoms of depression and anxiety, But I think one of the most important things that came out of that study was that women are experiencing meaningfully worse mental health symptoms and severity than men. They're drinking more hazardously. And 1 in 4 women is actually contemplating, and this is DC lawyers and California lawyers who responded, but 1 in 4 women is contemplating leaving the legal profession due specifically to mental health problems, burnout, or stress.
You know, one of the problems, though, let me ask you this, maybe Judge, you can weigh in on this as well. Let's pretend you are a very forthright person. You know you have this problem. You know, you're embarrassed by it, and you see that it might have an impact. I don't have the sense that the courts are very empathetic about this. In other words, if I see a case coming up for trial a month down the line, and because of my situation, I know I'm not getting the job done, I don't see a vehicle, at least in the Circuit Court of Cook County of Illinois, where I could walk across the street and talk to somebody and say, hey, confidentially, I'm losing it here. I don't want to go to my firm. I don't want to lose my job. But yet I don't want to screw up this case that's coming up for trial. I'm smart enough to recognize my fiduciary obligation and duties here. Judge, have you ever dealt with that, or is there any program?
That's an interesting point. Tracy and I can both recall a conversation that we've had about trying to come up with a model rule that would allow an attorney or a judge to step back from the practice because of health issues, mental health issues of that type, where it's a work in progress, because as we move in a forward progressive way in the wellness community, I think that's the next step. But unfortunately, there are the rigors of a court docket. And one of the difficulties that I brought up is just what you mentioned. You know, judges are very concerned about moving cases, about the disposition rate of the cases in their court, even more so now with COVID. So I believe that's something we're going to have to address, but I believe that's kind of a conversation we're going to have after COVID is under control, because most of the judges I talk with now are very concerned because jury trials have been curtailed substantially. Their court calendars are backed up. And so any conversation about delaying anything that's set for trial is going to be problematic for most judges, unfortunately. But once COVID is under control, I think that's an important conversation for us to have.
You know, maybe the answer would be if LAP came up with a program where I could first go to LAP, tell them, you know, because this is the lawyer's got to, at some point, got to out himself a bit.
Right.
First goes to LAP, has a private consultation, a counselor with LAP certifies somehow that this problem is real, and then the court has a confidential pathway where the lawyer and a LAP consultant can go to the court so that the judge knows it's not a bunch of baloney. I mean, heaven forbid that there would be a lawyer out there seeking a continuance, Judge, because he might be having a bad day with, you know, his substance control, right? I mean, they would never lie. They would never misrepresent that, would they?
Yeah. One of the other difficulties nowadays is with the bigger cases, because, you know, lawyers like yourself are with firms. There's always a thought on a judge's mind, well, there's probably someone else in the firm that could step in and finish that case. And so that would be the first thing that a judge would ask is there someone else who's familiar with the case? And for most large firms, you know, there are, you know, cases of any significance are at least 2 or 3 deep. In other words, you've got the managing partner plus there maybe a couple of associates. So there's another part of the judges that there are a team. And so this is just one lawyer that's part of a team as opposed to solo practitioners.
That's what I always say about those big law firms, Judge, like my pals at Kirkland and Winston and Jenner and Williams and Conley. They have an army. They always put up these armies against us.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to hypothetical number 3. Anja is a new associate at a law firm Anja has always been a go-getter and often requests to work on the most complicated projects. Anja also is very active in several bar associations, even serving as a leader, and is the room parent for her son's kindergarten class as well. Lately, Anja has been bombarded with emails, voicemails from clients. I bet you all can relate to that. They got deadlines and they're all approaching, and she's got volunteer activities, and she still hasn't purchased the birthday cake for her son's upcoming birthday in 2 days. Anja feels exhausted, overwhelmed, all at the same time, and she's experiencing some physical symptoms, stomach aches, and is having trouble concentrating. Concerned about the stress and anxiety, she speaks to her supervising attorney, Sally, and Sally is old school. She just dismisses Anja's issues and says, you know, new attorney jitters, you know, tells Anja that she needs to calm down and buck it up. And she wants Anja, you know, she says, listen, you're not going to become a partner if you keep talking like this. So Anja's law firm, is Anja's law firm properly handling her issues, given that she is an adult and can, you know, reach out for help in any areas that she feels is needed? Is that true or false? What do you say there, Miss Erin?
No, I think that her firm is not correctly handling this. I mean, we're really noticing that even students in law school, I've done some work with one of the local law schools, are struggling with these situations as they are clerking, right? So, I mean, having a better work-life balance is really important, because not only does it, you know, help the individual, but it also helps the firm. And so I think it gets back to that. And you and I have talked about this, Dad, that old school mentality of, you know, just work, and kill yourself and just, you know, suck it up and deal with it. But I don't really think that's helpful for people. And I think that we've really begun to see that. And so I think in Anja's case, you know, getting some kind of wellness support, whether it's for the lawyer's assistance program, hiring, you know, a coach or a possible therapist, could help her find a work-life balance. But the problem is this really needs to come from the top down. You know,
well, I think it looks like 96% of people agree with you. So let me continue then with the hypothetical. So what are the next steps for Anja? Should she A, quit her job? Should she get a life coach or counselor on how to better manage her time and her priorities? Should she confide in a supervisory attorney who better understands Anja's bigger picture situation? And finally, D, should she suggest realigning Anja's job to the firm's culture, structure, and compensation that better address her problems? What do folks think about that? And
Well,
first, Tracy, what do you think?
Yeah, Tracy.
Sure. Well, I'll make 2 points. I mean, first, we have to be real, right? The law, the legal profession, legal practice representing clients is stressful. And we have to get our heads around that and figure out what we can do with ourselves, with our firms, with our solo practices to combat against that stress. I don't think we can ever eliminate that. So we need to put something in place so that we are not overtaken by it. The other problem, I think, is that it's really a difficult nut to crack when you start talking about law firms, in that sometimes there's a culture of keeping things underground, sort of this conspiracy of silence. You know, if it ain't broke, right? There's a desire, we don't want to embarrass people. As long as they're performing, it's easier just to avoid it. And I also think that in some respects, there's a lack of understanding that addiction is a disease. And so we really need to work on that framework. And just briefly, you know, there was a survey by the International Bar Association that looks at law firms as well as individuals globally. And they had some really detailed responses to these questions about what's happening, what we need to do, what law firms need to do. And it was positive, right? 83% of those people who responded said, yes, in a law firm, mental health is a priority. 73% had well-being initiatives in place. And then that's where we see it kind of drop off and go down. And the problem was, and it's something that Erin said, only 16% of those same people who responded said they had training for managers, or that people on executive committees, management committees, partners were actually involved in the process, went to the trainings, part of collecting the data. And And we need to have this bar go all the way across. It needs to be 86, it needs to be 100, but it needs to be 86 all the way across to really impact in the culture of the firm.
Yeah. Brian, what do you
Bob,
think?
if I could, yeah, Bob, if I could just make a comment about
Sure, Judge.
some of the larger firms have diversity, equity, and inclusion committees within the firms. That's a good place for this conversation to start, because if you want to retain women in the firm, you have to listen to women. And I'm just getting that from a February, March article in the American Bar Association magazine, where it talks about asking the women if you really want to be able to understand what they need and what they want and how to retain them. And also, there was a study done in the American Bar Association about a year or so ago. It was mentioned in an October article in the New York Times op-ed section, where a disproportionate number of female attorneys in firms were looking at leaving the practice of law because they just didn't fit in. So I think more needs to be done to listen to women and find ways to make them feel part of the firm.
There you go. Thank you, Judge. Brian?
Well, I think just looking at the nuts and bolts of this, is this the supervising lawyers culture one, or is this the firm's culture, right? Because I've spoken at NAMWOLF firms where they talk about work-life balance and this and that, and I'll get an email from an associate saying, well, yeah, they talk a good talk, but I'm working in 100 hours a week on a case that isn't set for a year, and we're not on any deadlines. So I think what a lawyer can also do when we have the systemic issues, and then we have this person's asking me to do something and I'm stressed. So take a look at your situation, take a look how you can articulate it to your supervisor. Here's what you've asked me to do. Here are the deadlines. Here is my plan to get it done while also taking care of myself. And if you give specifics like that, rather just than I'm stressed, I think the odds go up that you are going to get a positive conversation and a positive response.
Yeah, I note that Sonia took the numbers down, but the 20% of the audience thought that no one thought she should quit her job, or maybe only a couple did, not enough to register.
Boundaries are tough.
Yeah, but 20% said, get a life coach, counselor on how to better manage your time or priorities. But the majority talked about confide in a supervisory attorney who better understands Anja's bigger picture situation. And I have to tell you, as I was reading that again right now, it just struck me that really puts it on the firm. I mean, to me, the message that maybe comes out of this is that the firms, if we're going forward, if we really want to be doing this the right way, the firms have to have a program in place to get that CNA discount, by the way. All right. But to have a program in place that provides a pathway, because I can tell you, I'm visualizing this right now. If one of my young people came to me and the agony that they would be going through and the anxiety and the difficulty, I got to go into Bob's office and have this conversation. That's really going to be hard. I think that's my takeaway from this, is that the firm's got to be proactive to create the platform that works. Tracy?
One of the things one of the things that came out, it's a legal employer, it's not a law firm, but it came out of Twitter. And they have this it's a mental health allyship program, and they call it OWLS. It's a bird theme, Twitter. And they're all volunteers, and they have listening circles. They have training for their employees, for the people who want to be owls. They are available for office hours. And what it is really this person you can go to talk, it's training on the fundamentals of listening, right? Being heard, having that person be heard and validated. What to do in a mental health crisis, not to solve it. JD doesn't mean MD, what resources to go to, but how to be an ally and how to be present, listen, educate, show that you care, and then go from there. And it's a designated person who obviously has a passion, who wants to be involved, but that can be the person where there's a comfort level in discussing these issues. Just
And that's
one
a great
idea
point,
that works
Tracy.
for Twitter.
Yeah, Bob, you
you
made
know-
a good point about how the firm really needs to take a little bit more responsibility in this area. The typical way of associates and lawyers getting together has been the cocktail party after work. One alternative that I heard that's really healthy is we all know about speed dating. And so this was really a kind of a version of that, but within the firm. And it was called speed knowing the lawyers in the firm. And so so it's an exercise so that the senior partners get a chance to know some of the associates. And so what they do is they go around for about 5 minutes with each of the senior lawyers in the firm. That way people get to know each other without it being so that it's fair in the sense of everybody getting a chance to know each other. And so that seems to work well, especially for women and minorities who otherwise are kind of left out of golfing engagements or the cocktail parties or those other kind of events where alcohol is usually kind of the way everybody kind of gets loose.
Yeah.
Sure, I know we have to move on, but I want to make one more point. I know there are lawyers out there watching this who are thinking to themselves right now, well, that's all well and good on paper, but you don't work at my firm, all right? That is not the culture at my firm. So in the real, when with that, there's still, somebody's being pressured, somebody doesn't have the boundaries, somebody doesn't know how to set boundaries or is afraid of being fired if they even try to set boundaries. So we have to acknowledge that, in the firms, in the real world, this is just the way it is in some places. And it still comes down to how do I have that conversation and can I have that conversation? And
Well,
in that case, you can reach out to code people like Erin who specialize in talking about how to have the conversation in firms where it's not had that much.
Yeah, well, I'll share this and then we'll move on. I have a friend who, when I was talking to him about this program, because some people, I've got buddies who say, why are you having such a program? And then we had another friend who was with us and he says, I'll tell you why he's having it. We had a circumstance in our office where when we got to the office on Monday morning and Charlie wasn't there. And Charlie's a senior partner in the firm with a lot of responsibility. Well, for 5 days, we could not find Charlie. And we couldn't find his wife. And we actually had then sent out our investigators to find Charlie. And we finally found his wife and son, who then confided in us that Charlie was in a psych ward with a problem. And it was not alcohol related, but it was stress related in the job. Well, there were some balls that were dropped by Charlie that had the firm, maybe if the firm had a program in place or a pathway in place for Charlie to have reported this kind of stuff in some way, shape, or form, the firm wouldn't have been as compromised, and more importantly, the client wouldn't have been as compromised by what happened. I mean, so this stuff does get very real. All right, let's move on to hypothetical number 4. This is the long one. I don't know who wrote this one, Pam. All right, Latrice is a 68-year-old litigation attorney in a small firm in downstate Illinois. She has been honored many times for her expertise and trial skills by the ISBA. Latrice has suffered a number of medical issues in the past several years and has been advised by her doctors to slow down. But Patrice loves the pressure and excitement of being in the courtroom regularly. Who doesn't? Recently, Laura, her longtime law partner, has noticed some lapses of memory and confusion that are not at all typical for Latrice. Latrice has started to forget her assistant's name, and she's mixing up the details of the many cases she is currently handling, and cited to a precedent in a brief that had been currently and recently overturned. Laura is friendly with opposing counsel on for Latrice's cases and has heard that Latrice's behavior in court is increasingly erratic and strange. And in fact, on one occasion, Latrice showed up in court on the wrong case and became angry and belligerent when the clerk said the case was not on the call. Laura also sees other signs of what she believes might be dementia in Latrice, but hesitates to diagnose her, confront her, or ruin her reputation as an extraordinarily dedicated attorney. Laura hopes that Latrice will decide to retire before things get any worse. So there you go, Tracy, and here's our hypothetical. Should Laura confront Latrice? That's a yes or a no. And then let's talk about, we'll get that quick poll. And the answer is there is strongly, very strongly a yes, you should confront her. So now let's turn to, I think that's a no-brainer. Now let's turn to the other poll questions. If Laura confronts Latrice, what are the next steps if Latrice denies she has a problem? A, force intervention by the firm. B, if the firm has no policy regarding such issues, bring it up with firm management to start impairment and or transition policies. C, call lawyers assistance program, LAP. D, discreetly have Latrice's supervisors remove cases from her caseload to avoid malpractice. And E, all of the above.
Man, this is one where I'm against the grain, I guess.
Yeah. Well, wait. Let's say. All right. Let's stay on a positive here. Tracy, what should you do? And then we'll go to Brian.
Well, you know, I think most of us went to law school and became lawyers because we like to help people. And so I'm not sure why that goes out the window when it's one of our friends or our colleagues in the profession. And so, you know, if you are concerned about a friend or a colleague, the first thing is to show some empathy, to talk to them, and see if sometimes there's another reason for the changes that you're observing. We talked about this earlier. Maybe it's a medication change. Maybe it's not cognitive impairment. Maybe it's a medication change. Maybe they've had a fall and they've, you know, they've hit their head. Maybe there's something else that you can identify. The other thing with regard to the cognitive impairments, I really think it's a tricky situation because attorneys who are experiencing cognitive decline are also concerned about their financial well-being, their status in the firm, their reputation, and their whole identity as a lawyer. So it's a very tricky conversation to have and to start, but you need to do it, and you can do it when it comes from a place of caring.
So Brian, why are you contrarian here?
Not necessarily contrarian, but before I would never bring up cognition in a conversation with somebody, even if I thought that was the case. Because that is such a delicate conversation. We are seeing more and more of it in the lawyers' assistance programs. And as the boomers age, I'm a boomer, we're going to see more and more. My first call, if I thought that was going on, would be to the lawyers' assistance program to get advice from people who have seen this before and exactly how I should bring it up.
What do you think, Judge? What do you think, Judge?
Well, it's very, this is just so much in my consciousness because just this month, as a volunteer for our Lawyers Assistance Program, I was asked to talk with a lawyer. A judge was concerned about their conduct in court and felt that the lawyer needed to leave the practice. After about a week of no contact, the lawyer did respond. Unfortunately, the lawyer has a brain tumor, but the way he was acting out made me suggested something else. He was having trouble hearing. That was associated with the brain tumor. He was having trouble walking and his gait was a little unsteady, but that also was because of the brain tumor. So I agree with Mr. Cuban with respect to the Lawyers Assistance Program is the best place to start these kinds of conversations because as a volunteer, we're trained. We also have the access to the clinicians that are with the Lawyers Assistance Program. So if there are questions that come up, we can talk with them. And so the Lawyers Assistance Programs, you know, across the country are the best place, in my view, to kind of start these difficult but necessary conversations, especially as more lawyers are aging.
Yes. You know, Judge, I have to tell you, I'm in a matter right now with a dear friend and, you know, after the third time that he's telling me about the same thing, I start to wonder whether or not I ought to say something. And I actually did. I actually did. And he got madder than the Dickens at me.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem here.
Yeah, one of the big issues for our age group, and I can say it because I'm in that age group, is denial. I have a son-in-law who's also a lawyer, and I've asked him about every 6 months to kind of give me a report card of how I'm doing, because my mom had dementia, and so we have to have systems in place where we kind of look out for our own well-being. So it's just a very real issue, and I think it's a growing issue for the legal community.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll confide in you. We've talked about this in our office among the senior partners, and we all kind of have an agreement that on the funny side, or not the funny side of it is, but on the fun side of things, we say, if I start acting like that, take me out in the back and shoot me. That's what I told them. But on a serious note, we've all said, hey, let's all agree that if things start to go bad, and we're going to be forthright enough with one another to say that, because once again, we're all handling some pretty serious stuff. When you're a fiduciary handling other people's obligations, or you're a judge making decisions about people's rights, I mean, you can't let this stuff get in the way and let your ego prevent you from being honest with yourself about it.
Absolutely.
And I think the poll, oh, those are pretty children. All right, I think the poll says all the above and go in the lap. The force and intervention. I think these are all good ideas.
And as Erin can probably speak,
go ahead, Brett.
Part of cognition issues, and I can only speak anecdotally, is that you may not realize that cognition is an issue. So, in your practice or just in your life. So, and I've seen this from a personal standpoint. So that's why it's so important before you confront, talk to the experts.
There you go. All right, let's
and
move
in
on.
addition to the one more thing, in addition to the LAP programs, a lot of bar associations around the country and here in Illinois have transitioning lawyers committees, or aging lawyers working groups, or lawyer succession and transition committees that can also help around these issues. Maybe not the health issues, but certainly the talking about starting your encore career, succession planning, and retirement.
Well, that's a new one for me. Encore career.
That's what I like to call it. What are you going to do next? Your encore career.
Oh, so it's no longer retirement; it's encore career. Okay,
no.
Got it. All right. Hypothetical number 5. Whenever Joe is engaged in trial, he winds up going days with little sleep and little or no sleep. He also finds himself binging on junk food, overeating, and getting unhealthy meals out from unhealthy places instead of cooking at home. Even worse, he gets so obsessed with the case that he puts his family's needs and wants on hold, which creates stress for both him and the family. Okay, it describes a lot of people I know. Hypothetical 5. How can Joe manage and change this vicious cycle? A, seek assistance with the lawyer's assistance program or his firm's wellness consultant. B, talk to his supervisor about his predicament and see if accommodations can be made for him. D, do nothing and hope it will get better and get over it. Or D, confide in his loved ones and ask for help. I don't know, might also be some other choices there, but let's see what first off, let's see what the polling people, all the numbers are starting to come in. And I think on this one, Erin, while the numbers are coming in, tell us what your dad should have been doing.
Well, first of all, in my opinion, do nothing and hope it gets better is not the right answer here, right? We want to be proactive. And I would argue that the idea here is, how do you build resilience and mental and physical fitness? So when you are on trial and it's not just when you're having these crises and these really stressful times. Because if we look at the research, even on mindfulness, for example, they always say meditate or do breathing. That doesn't help you if you only do it when you're stressed out. You need to build up that resilience, have good sleep, exercise. If you need support from a coach or mental health practitioner, have those things in place. So when you have these very busy, stressful times, you have that higher level of resilience. And in this case scenario, I would say, one, talk to your loved one. Say, hey, I'm going to be on trial. Things are going to be difficult the next like week or two or a month. Like, I really need your support. We get in trouble when we don't communicate with our loved ones. And when it comes to having healthy resources available to you, you know, keep snacks at your office, order some prepared meals, have your secretary do it. The idea here is really planning and communicating.
Tracy, what do you think?
This is my platform for sleep and the importance of sleep. Lawyers are the most sleep deprived profession, right? It starts in law school. You're cramming all night. Then you're a young associate and you're trying to prove your worth. And then before you know it, you're a law firm partner and who hasn't had consistent sleep all the way, you know, for however many years. And it starts to catch up with you. And it's not just stress, anxiety, depression, maybe even, you know, you're missing court dates, client harm, but also physically. I mean, you have diabetes, heart disease, having consistent sleep, and as to Erin's point, establishing personal wellness and non-negotiables around sleep is critical. Not, you know, turning off your screens, having a routine, developing, I call them decompression rituals around bedtime, you know, before bed, trying to get to bed earlier, skipping the nightcap. You know, alcohol does not help. You may think it may help your sleep, but it doesn't. All things that you can do to stop the ruminating, turning off your brain, and actually getting the sleep that you need for your own health.
Well, you know, I've been trying cases for approaching 46 or 7 years, and I can tell you that a lot of this is so easier said than done. I mean, you know, if you're on trial and you go to bed at 9 o'clock at night, most trial lawyers I know will be tossing and turning most of the night because they're on trial and they're doing witness examinations. But I think one strategy, and look into what the polling here is, you know, I don't know what assistance LAF can give me on something like that, but the firm having a wellness consultant really makes a lot of sense, because you could have a program in place for a firm that, you know, when someone's on trial, number one, the modern trials now are more than one lawyer, you know, in the courtroom. We have a rule at Clifford Law that no case should be tried with just one lawyer. And it's really, that's more driven by the fact that it's so hard to get experience at trial now, that you really need to, as a guy who runs a law firm, I'm trying to make sure that people get experience. But there's really no reason why the firm can't support the trial team by making sure that there is some healthy food around, that these little mechanical things, you know, are taken care of, that maybe transportation is provided. You know, if folks are going to go drive home, maybe have a driver, maybe have one of the law clerks driving people back and forth. You know, maybe make prearranged snacks that the lawyer can have in their office while they're, you know, after hours prepping a witness, stuff like that. I think a support structure would go a long way, and you know, a wellness consultant could tell you how to build that. And then the one that jumps out to me, of course, is talking to your loved ones. I mean, most trial lawyers I know, their spouses, men or women, you know, they get and understand what they do for a living. And trying cases, you know, older lawyers will talk about how trying cases is not a young man's game, or is not an old man's game. It's a young man's game. And, you know, I think that's a truism. I think, you know, we're talking about, you know, inclusion here. I mean, being a spouse, being a mother or a father, and is hard to balance those things with doing trial work. Trial work is really different than so many things in the practice of law. You know, Judge, how about your observation on this over the years? You've been around a lot of men and women who do trials.
Yes, one of the things I'll mention, and I was involved with the judicial survey on stress and resiliency. And one of the things that was mentioned by the judges overwhelmingly that was that diet and healthy eating was something that they put a priority on, which was kind of a surprise to me. I'm of the club where I walk at least 30 minutes per day because that's a part of wellness, and also watching what I eat personally. But I use the rule that if you have a health emergency, one of the first things that the doctors will tell you is exercise more and watch what you eat. So I think that's a good practice for lawyers, especially in our high stress environment, to incorporate healthy eating as well as some exercise.
Yeah. So folks, let me do this. We're on the tail end of our hour of time here, and I'm very grateful for all of your contributions to this. And if I could, let me start, Brian, and give you 30 to 60 seconds. So your last words of wisdom and what knowledge would you like to impart to the group, to the thousands that are on this program today? Could you please tell us?
Sure. We go through life every day and we're going to encounter somebody who's struggling with something, right? A mental health issue, whether it's substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder, opioids, or major depression. And we all have the ability to use a tool that we've all been given to hopefully make someone's life better. And that's the tool of empathy, that we all have the ability to empathize, and we all have the ability to ask one question, that we do it all the time going through the day. But when we think someone's struggling, all of a sudden it becomes one of the hardest questions to ask. How are you doing? How are you doing today? And before that conversation breaks, let someone know. I call it the 2 ask rule. Do you know that if you ever want to talk, I'm here? And we do that all the time anyways, but all of a sudden, if it's a colleague or it's even a family member, we get afraid of those questions. And you don't have to be an expert at anything to use the tool of empathy and just ask how someone's doing, and then ask it again and let them know that you're there.
Okay, Tracy. Thank you, Brian.
Sure. I think we really need to focus on a service-centered mission in the profession. As I said, at its core, we're a helping profession. And a lot of that aspect gets lost in the rush of business and practice. And if legal employers and all of us can come together and think about what we value, what we prioritize, and how those values are communicated, we may have a better sense of well-being, either in our own personal practice, in our big, in firm practice, as well as stemming the tide of this great resignation and having people stay because they believe in what they're doing. They feel meaningful, they feel purposeful, and that contributes to well-being overall.
Erin, thank you, Tracy.
I would just like to say that I would love it if everybody would make this year the year of self-care. I always go with that adage when you're on the airplane and the stewardess or flight attendant tells you, right, put the oxygen mask on first for yourself and then assist others. And I really feel like if we want to be the best lawyers that we can be, judges, practitioners, friends, colleagues, we really need to be taking care of ourselves. So this year, start adding in small things. Exercise a little bit, grab some fruits and vegetables, water, eat healthy, do some mindfulness. Just slow changes over time can be really a great thing for all of us to model for the profession and take a way to take care of ourselves.
Thank you, Erin. And Your Honor, as is appropriate, you get the last word, sir.
Well, I have a daughter who's also a lawyer as well, and so I want to support what Erin said, and that is that we really need to have a little bit more compassion in the profession. Several years ago, there was a movement of the ends of court trying to promote civility in the law. And I haven't heard as much about that in the last couple of years, especially with COVID. But I think this is a really good and very important time for us to be more concerned about our colleagues' well-being as opposed to just winning another case and making some money. So I support Erin's view that let's make this a year of caring and compassion as lawyers, reaching out to colleagues.
All right. Well,
that's perfect for Random Acts of Kindness Day, right?
Yes.
That's today.
Yes.
All right. Well, on that note, I want to thank once again each of our panelists. Let's kindly, if you would, switch your videos off. And if our other panelists would be kind enough once again to join us, we've got This is terrific. We've got Leah's joined, there's Leslie, and there's Lindsey. And thank you again to all of them. So folks, now let's turn to, when we talk about mind, body, and soul, the weathering effect. And here, of course, it's a very interesting concept, and it's a very interesting matter of concern to the profession. I think what the way to kick this off is, if I could, Lindsey, I'll give you the floor to talk a little bit about your observations regarding the diversity and conclusion and weathering effect.
Well, Bob, first of all, thank you for having this panel as part of this discussion. And as you're going to see as we go through it, some of it relates directly to what we just heard. But it's important that we start by saying, at a time when wedges seem to be so critical in the way that things operate, that we understand that terms like diversity, equity, inclusion aren't always the term for some other. You know, we do a lot of talk about this concept and large law firms having DEI departments or people devoted to them or a vice president for it. But the whole diversity, equity, inclusion conversation is one that goes throughout the profession. Whether we're talking about law firms, it's an issue that's important to small firms, to government practitioners, to solo practitioners. And so we're going to cover why this discussion fits all of the profession. On the next slide is
bring up the next slide, please.
Is the beginning of one way of looking at the whole issue of diversity. Exactly what does diversity entail? And we're all familiar with the notion that it's the differences that may exist with race, with gender, starts to get a bit more complicated, religious differences, sexual orientation or identification, even within racial conversations, ethnicity. Frankly, socioeconomic status and nationality don't always come into how we think about things, but they do in actual practice. Language, how important language is, not just among members of the profession, but with our clients and those with whom we work. Issues of age are those things that, well, I know I started to think about it a lot more now as I'm getting older, and disability. And frankly, as I listened in the last panel and heard the discussion about the kinds of things that we do to bring lawyers together, disability came to mind as one of the things, and we'll talk a bit about that later. And finally, political perspective. There are a whole bunch of people who feel uncomfortable discussing how they feel or what they believe within the legal community because at times they feel they don't fit and it would not be helpful to their particular career to continue that discussion. Lea also on the next slide has a perspective.
Yeah, so the definition that Lindsey has just discussed includes some examples of groups that we may think about when thinking about diversity. But if you recall from that last slide, it said that it may include, and so what we all remember from statutory interpretation in law school is that the word may, is not exhaustive. And so here's another definition for us to think about that kind of further describes the breadth of what diversity entails. And so this says that diversity is the collection of the characteristics we have, the experiences we've had, and the choices we've made. Now, some of those things we'll have in common with others and some we won't. Some will be visible and some will not be. And so as you can see, this is a very expansive definition that essentially includes every aspect that makes us uniquely who we are as individuals. It includes the characteristics that were on the last slide, like race, gender, sexual orientation, and ability status. And it also includes things like our learning style, our communication style, our motivation, and our goals. So with this definition in mind, Bob, can you please launch our first poll?
Tanya? Okay, do you agree with the breadth of this definition of diversity? 100%.
Oh, there we
That one. Oh no, we're changing. We got some discourse here. Well, not much.
This will go for 30 seconds until, so I don't know who would like to address what the results are here now.
Yeah, sure. So I'm pleasantly surprised to see that 91% of the people agree with this definition of diversity and the breadth of it. I think that oftentimes there can be this misconception in the profession that diversity is solely about women, people of color, LGBTQ folks, and certainly it includes those groups, but it includes each and every one of us. And it's really important for all of us to connect with DEI so that we can move the needle forward. And that's why it's important to have this all-encompassing definition of diversity. Lindsey?
And there's a second part of this question. Does your diversity go across one or more of these social categories? And I'm going to work with the 100%. I gather that, I mean, I see that there are some people who are going, well, not really, but it really is hard to be in one category. There is very little in life that allows us to fit in one box. That doesn't happen real often. I very much, I recognize, and I'm not ignoring anybody's answer there. So I see there are some people who feel yes. But part of why it's important to see that, no, we are not just one thing, is because at times conversations tend to see the woman lawyer, the African-American lawyer, and everybody's not the same. None of us are monolith, including lawyers from majority populations. The profession is not a single one, nor are the people within it. We cross a number of different areas, and as the next slide would indicate, hopefully.
Tanya?
That there really are a number of areas in which there is an intersection of who we are as individuals, who we are as people. Lea, I know this was one of the areas in which you had some strong thoughts as well.
Oh, no, I didn't have any additional thoughts beyond what you've raised.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's important to bear in mind that who we are speaks in a number of areas, and that is a strength that we need to recognize, because that helps us identify with and recognize the other members of the profession as well as those whom we serve. Sonia? Part of what it's important to do is to recognize that diversity is a benefit to the profession. That, first of all, the whole notion of creativity, we get better ideas, we get different ideas, we get different approaches, because we have different strengths, skills, experiences that diverse populations bring. The whole notion of cultural sensitivity, insight, that's one of the things that the more diverse our population, the better we can respond to, and the better the ideas that we have in how to approach problems and come up with solutions. One of the things about the law has a certain level of foundational belief. This is where we are. But sometimes the approach could generate different responses. And that's what diversity does. It brings different skill base and the different perspectives. it allows a difference in professional as well as personal growth. And frankly, if we start to look at diverse populations, we have a better pool of potential employees, workers, as well as the ideas that I have just discussed.
Lindsey, some might say that to not consider diversity is, especially as it relates to diverse teams in the practice of law, is almost like malpractice. Because as lawyers, we solve problems. That is what we do. And it's undeniable that when you have a bigger number of perspectives, of educational backgrounds, of ways of looking at the universe, you get an exponentially a bigger number of possible outcomes. So really it's math. And so when you look at it in terms of math and not just doing the right thing for the right reasons and the right way and all of those things, but you look at it in terms of math and how many possible outcomes, good outcomes that you want to have for your client, then having a diverse team is undeniable. And there'll be some who would say it's even malpractice not to have the same. So that's another way of looking at diversity as pure math.
And I would just add, I didn't want you to go anywhere because I'm on to something, but part of it is in a profession where precedence is so much where we tend to rely. The point that you just made is a critical one, is that having that larger pool of ideas and approaches is so important. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, you know, it's obviously important to the profession and the, you know, connection that needs to be created between the clients that we serve and the practice of law and the rule of law. But where do you see the most important feature of this when it comes to the day-to-day practice of running a law firm of any kind where you're serving the public? You know, but Leslie, can you jump in on that one?
I want to make sure I understand your question. So you mean in terms of putting it into practice on a
Yes.
daily basis?
On a daily basis. Yeah,
Sure. Sure. And so it takes on different forms depending on what you're talking about. So if you're talking about, for example, the clients that you have and those clients being diverse, it's understanding that you have to have a diverse team to handle their problems. So if you have, for example, African-American clients, you want to have African-American lawyers or other people of color to help shepherd their process because they may be seeing things that other majority lawyers may not see. Maybe it's when you're talking about in terms of whom you're hiring. If you are the decision maker in a law firm, recognizing that the clients that you serve need to have a diverse team, if for no other reason than to get the best possible outcomes. Right. And, you know, and so all across the board, you know, it's a way of looking at how you are getting the most out of any potential outcomes in terms of looking at the diversity. I challenge us not to look at it in terms of, oh, it's a good thing to do, it's the right thing to do. I look at it in more of a business practice. All of the lawyers that I know, they're interested in making money and they are interested in doing well by their clients and interested in being successful and winning. And so if that is a goal to do the best by your clients, then you've got to be able to bring to them a broader array of possible suggestions for the solutions for their problems. And so that just cuts across all the lines.
You really need to understand their perspectives. And if you don't, then you're not able to effectively communicate their needs to the extent that you know, whether you're trying cases or you're making presentations or you're just trying to figure out the right pathway to counsel and advise, you need to understand perspective and experiences that are not unique, that are not yours. You have to have other input.
Absolutely.
And Bob, I would just ask you to recall, and Lea, I apologize because I jumped in and didn't give you the chance to speak, but one of the things that I think it's important to bear in mind that the the comments that Leslie just made really also apply to, a fairly homogeneous community. Those are not just if you are dealing in a community that has a significant population of people of color and therefore the clientele. One of the things you want to recognize is that the perspective, some of us who grew up in legal families and there were, the career got passed down, we all have seen things one way, or if we grew up in a community where everybody looked the same, we see things one way. Sometimes we miss a lot. And that's what I think Leslie is also pointing out. Not just that you want, folks to be able to talk to people who are of a different ethnicity or a different race, because everybody in that race and ethnicity ain't gonna see the things the same way. That some of the people in the law firm, might not see things identically. But part of what you get is the benefit of additional ways of looking at things. And that's the point. I'm sorry, Lea.
No, that's okay. You're fine.
I think the only thing that I would add, Bob, if I can, is just that we've been talking about serving clients and making money and things. And I just want to shift the focus internally for a second, because I think we often forget that we also serve our colleagues. And it's really important for us to understand the perspectives of the people that we work with so that we can support them and give them what they need to be successful in the environment. And that benefits our business obviously as well. So I just wanted to put that point out there.
Well, very well said.
And that goes, before Bob, and I apologize, but before you go too much further, on that last point, this goes back to something that I believe Judge Shaheed talked about in the last session, and it falls on the slide that's currently there, the in practice one. As we talk about diversity in the workplace, one of the things that we want to do is first off recognize it involves a number of steps. First of all, obviously, attracting people to the positions, whether it's a large firm, whatever the size of the firm is, being open-minded in choosing who to hire. But once you get people there, once you get them there, the retention. And this is where I think Judge Shaheed was discussing the fact that if you've got, and I think his example was of a woman as the attorney, finding out what her needs are by talking to her, that everybody isn't going to conform to the existing firm tradition. Sometimes it's finding out, how can we help? How can you fit in? How can you be a part because of things we can do? And the last of the bullet points, the training, is making sure that we are providing to the lawyers who are there the information they need to be sure that they can not only fit in, but also that we get the best of their talents and their skills.
Thank you for that. Sonia, you've got, we have some polling here that I'm not certain of the slide number, might be 24 or 5. But in practice, does your organization have a diversity initiative or plan? And then secondly, do you believe your organization would benefit from having an initiative or diversity plan? Yes or no? So on the first one, does your organization have a diversity initiative or plan? Let's, I think we're going to be in the high 60 percentiles, it looks like.
Looks like roughly 2 to 1.
Yeah. So, well, bad news is it's only 2 to 1. Good news is that it's a long way from where we've been, but we got a long way to go, don't we?
Well, obviously my response to that would be, and that's because I'm kind of the senior member of our panel, we've come a long way, would be the way that I would start with that, is that there were times when this was not a conversation that took place. The other part of that is we clearly have a long way to go. Lea and Leslie?
Yeah. Well, I was just say, Lea and Leslie, let's start with Lea. Lea, how's this working at the State's Attorney's Office? And then your experience with government.
I've solely worked in government, and I started out my career in the public defender's office before this was a conversation broadly in the legal profession. I joined the ARDC, and I actually was the founding director of DEI at the ARDC and led our efforts there. And so certainly the ARDC has a diversity program, and the state's attorney's office does too. I think that, when you're asking how's this working in the government, I think there's a common misconception that the government doesn't have diversity issues, that there's more diversity in the government or in the public sector than there is in the private sector. And in my experience, and also anecdotally, I don't think that that's true. And if there is, it's usually in administrative roles and lower level roles, certainly not in leadership. And so the same issues that exist within the private sector, within firms, also exist within government. And a lot of government agencies also don't have the resources, human and financial, to devote to diversity efforts. And so it's a challenge, it's a barrier.
I'd be curious the answers to the other question, the second question about, okay, so we know whether you do or you don't have it, your organization's 54 to 46, but how about those believe whether they would benefit from it? And there you go. How about that, huh?
We are starting to get some questions in here, and one, Lisa is asking, is it pandering to match associates to the background of the client? That feels cringy to me. I don't know who would like to address that.
It's very interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah. What do you say, Lindsey?
Well, my first thought is it's important to have someone who can talk to them, to the client. And so, for instance, if the issue is language, that to me is the no-brainer of the conversation. On the other hand, there's a part, and pandering was an interesting word, because at times I think of condescending as the word, that I'm not always sure how comfortable. I think having the person who is best attuned to what the problem is, be the person who comes in. Because I will tell you how often when I was in the public defender's office and clients would say, oh, they sent you because you also are Black. I mean, that was the word that was being used. And at times it was important to have to get over that. So I don't know that anybody here is suggesting that you have somebody who necessarily looks like or fits the description of the client. What I'm hearing from the other members, and what I hope that I am saying, is it's important to be able to have as a resource people who can present some of the same things and recognize what it is that the client is bringing to the table. Lea and Leslie, I didn't mean to take all of that one.
Well,
if they don't have anything, there's also, I mean, we can also.
I was trying to unmute my.
Oh, I'm sorry, Leslie.
Oh, no, it's not your problem. It's my fault. I don't know why my button won't unmute. But I was going to say, and this may not be a popular thing to say, but the question is only asked if it's pandering or if it's cringy or if it's placating or whatever when you're talking about diverse folks. When you pair a white male with another white male, nobody asks any questions. It's par for the course. And so for me, I take a different position. I take the position of absolutely, you should be trying to pair associates or others who may, because people aren't monolithic, but may have some shared experiences, some shared background experiences together. Why wouldn't you? And why would that be pandering? And why would that be problematic? It's never problematic when you talk about white males doing the same. It's almost like when you're in school. If all the majority folks, the white males sit together, it's okay. But when all the Black people sit at a table, you are separating yourself. It's an issue. It's a problem. And I think that's because we don't recognize that there is beauty in diversity, in talking about diversity, in sharing it, in recognizing it, in letting it be obvious. And so, yes, I would also say that if you are not being thoughtful about pairing folks with other people who have some of the same if it's not ethnicity, or if it's went to some of the same schools, or are involved in some of the same activities, then you're doing a disservice. Because I think it's okay to have an affinity for folks who have some of the experiences that you share. And that should not be considered to be problematic at all. So that's how I feel about it.
There you go.
To kind of pivot here, we have another question, Bob, about how can you avoid age discrimination when every app, website, and Sullivan's Law Directory insist on disclosing your year of birth? I don't know if the panel has some comments or thoughts on that.
Well, you know, I think that's a story, frankly, unto itself, because age discrimination is real. And maybe that's one of the panels that we have for next year. I really would, you know, if all you don't mind, we need to head towards what is a very important discussion, and that's the discussion on the weathering effect. You know, from the impact of that from the very front row, I think, and so, you know, let's talk about that. So I'd like, on this one, I'd like to turn to Leslie Davis to give us your insights, you know, through a career where you've seen the impact of the weathering effect from the front row seat, and maybe you can give us some real specific discussion about what it is. I'm not so sure, frankly, Leslie, that people really even know what we're talking about when we get to this.
So no problem. So yes, the weathering effect is something that is relatively new in terms of how it's being discussed in the diversity space. And so when you talk about weathering, it's literally, if you think about a drip, 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 if you look at just like a faucet, and if it continues to drip, 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 it leaves kind of a stain, or it whittles away at the material that's underneath it, because there's that constant drip that is happening. And so it's literally that way, that kind of a weathering that happens with many minorities. And when you talk about weathering, it first came up as it relates to African Americans, where it's that death by 1,000 slashes. It's when it might not be the one thing or the two things or the three things that happen, but it's over time as you continue to experience different discrimination. It chips away at your health. In fact, it chips away at your mental health, and it can chip away at your physical health as it relates to your blood pressure, your diabetes, onset of other illnesses. And it's a cumulative effect that happens because of what you're experiencing over time. I can give a good example of it, and there's so many examples, but even as a young lawyer, when I would show up at offices, there might be the secretary might say, "Oh, you could set up your equipment in the conference room." Well, I wasn't there to do the court reporting. I was there to represent a client. Or if I would show up in court and I'm dressed appropriately, sometimes the judge would say, "Let me know when your lawyer gets here." And so it's all of those kinds of things that happen over and over and over on a daily basis that then causes some effects on the person who is happening to that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily have. And so that's what the weathering effect really is. And it can cause people to die prematurely. Some of these slides, and you will notice that a lot of these slides really focus on black and white. And I think that's because that's how it originally came about. But undeniably, these same effects would be the same as it relates to any group that has that continuous drip drop of disrespect, discrimination, humiliation, and the list goes on and on. It just, these slides really show the effects as it relates to Black people and white people. And so this is a slide that kind of, illustrates that it can cause health effects as well, not to mention the mental effect. I don't know how many times we've heard the stereotype of the angry Black woman. I'll be the first to say that because I've heard it so many times. But nobody steps back to say, maybe it's, the stereotype fits the situation, because how many times does somebody have to be disregarded, devalued, disrespected before they rise up in a way that is pretty aggressive? And so, this is some of what you see when you're talking about weathering. Lindsey, Lea, do you all have anything you want to add about weathering? I can go on to talk about the psychosocial effects as well.
Why don't we do that if they, unless they have something to add?
Well, we have a
If
question
that-
here. What's the difference between microaggressions and micro inequities? Is there?
So I would say that there's very little difference. I think the fine line difference is microaggressions are those things that people are doing that have an effect on whomever they're doing it towards. Those are the aggressions. They can be microaggressions, they can be macroaggressions, they can be over the top as well. The inequities, though, I think is what is the result of what happens from all of those microaggressions. And so what ends up happening is you then see the inequity, and it can be micro, it can be macro. Because when you look at, for example, the number of women of color or people of color who are at the equity partner ranks in law firms, clearly some of those microaggressions have had the effect of minimizing the ability of those groups to be successful in those settings. And so, that's not so micro anymore. That's macro when you've got something like less than 2% of equity partners in large law firms being people of color. And we're sitting in 2022. That's not a micro inequity, that's a macro inequity. And how did it get that way? Probably by both some micro and macro aggressions. And so,
if I could just butt in just a second, Leslie, sure. I just like to try and suggest a brief response to that. I would term the aggression issue is one where there was an overt action. The equity piece is the situation that has existed because of things that have happened. And I would tender as the issue, for example, if we start to reward people who are the senior people all the time, that's who we look towards. I would say that's because others haven't had the opportunity earlier. The aggression piece is when people have taken action.
Yeah, just piggybacking on that, I would say that the microaggression are small slights, and they don't feel micro, to Leslie's point, to the person who is experiencing them, but they are these death by 1,000 paper cuts, these small slights that people say oftentimes, intended to be a compliment, like, oh, you look so exotic, or oh, you sound so articulate. That's a microaggression, whereas a micro inequity is something more systemic, that is a small, a seemingly small systemic thing, like Lindsey pointed out, like the last one hired is the first one fired, but they have inequitable outcomes, to Leslie's point.
Can I ask a question here? So in the last panel, we identified maybe programs and proactive measures that individuals and or law firms and or human resource departments should be taking in firms to address the problems that we were talking about there. Somehow I don't have a sense that there's such a organized package that could be transported into a firm to correct these points that we're discussing. Am I wrong about that, or have you seen such a thing like that, Leslie?
No, I don't think you're wrong about that at all. Unfortunately, I'm very sad about the fact that you're not wrong about that. In my experience, and I have been in small, medium, and large firms, the issues are so systemic, and it's so difficult to change behavior, because it would mean really changing the very heart of what's at the heart of the firm, Most firms deal with credit and columns and who has the relationship. And so unless you start to value diverse lawyers in the same way that you value other lawyers, then things won't change, because there has to be succession planning and there has to be real opportunities to have them become not just window dressing, but a real part of what's going on. It's like Vernee Meyer says, and I think this is the best way to illustrate it, is that diversity is being asked to come to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance once you get there. A lot of firms have diversity, but they don't have inclusion, because when you look at who are on the the management committees, who are making decisions about compensation, who are leading the trials, who are leading the efforts with the major clients, who is in the succession planning, and the list goes on and on. That's not the inclusion. You don't see people of color there, even though you may see them on the website. That's diversity without inclusion. That's being asked to go to the party without ever being asked to dance.
To your point there,
To
your point there, we have a question from Stephen who's asking, isn't it really a different problem when you're speaking about microaggressions, not diversity, and the insensitivity of many who have an inherent bias? Aren't those really two different problems?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, oftentimes microaggressions are experienced by underrepresented groups, based on a marginalized identity. So it's not disconnected from diversity at all. And oftentimes they are more the results of unconscious than conscious or explicit bias, because like I said before, oftentimes it's intended to be a compliment and people don't realize that what they're saying is harmful or hurtful. I don't know, Leslie or Lindsey, do you have?
I agree.
Well,
No, I agree
that
with
was
you.
it. I'm sorry. What I wanted to do, and Lea has a part of the presentation that I think goes directly to answer the question that Bob raised. And if we could advance to that part of the presentation that starts with the slide, what can be done? Lea, if you can do that, I think we'll answer part of what was asked.
Yeah.
I can, Bob, and just to answer your question directly, because you were asking, it seemed, was there something that could be implemented, across firms? And I would say we're talking about human behavior. We're talking about people, and so it's complex, and so there can't be a cookie cutter.
Yeah, so this is a good spot to jump in, because I know you have some very specific, remarks about what can be done to mitigate the weathering effect in the legal community. So, I mean, maybe Lea, if you could just start by telling us things that individuals can do to help prevent others from experiencing these weathering effects.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that individuals can do, so this is not organizations, but individuals, is to really try to understand other people's experiences and perspectives. And that starts by doing your own research. So oftentimes aspiring allies can be tempted to put the onus of educating them on members of marginalized communities by asking them about their experiences. But it's really important to start by doing your own research to deepen your understanding first, so that you're not putting that extra cognitive and emotional labor of explaining concepts and situations on members of underrepresented groups. It's certainly okay to ask questions when needed, but only after first doing your own research, and also after asking permission to ask a question. So for example, you can say you're trying to better understand the experiences of being the only or one of a few of a particular group in your organization or team, so that you can be a better colleague, and you can explain some of the research you've been doing to deepen that understanding, and then ask if they wouldn't mind sharing their own experiences with you, and respect it if they don't want to. Also, when doing that, always remember that no one is a spokesperson for an entire identity group, that there's diversity and intersectionality within each group, and that can change experiences and perspectives. Doing your own research also means brushing up on history to understand, the experiences and perspectives of others. It's also important to listen, and that also means that we're talking less. I think that our profession values quick responses and thinking on our feet, which requires us to listen while also formulating a response. But the listening we need to do to understand others' perspectives is very different. We need to listen with the intent of understanding, not the intent to respond. And then finally, understanding others' experiences requires us to seek out marginalized voices and perspectives. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, the second thing that individuals can do is to use their privilege to help others. And when I use the word privileged, I'm referring to the advantages, opportunities, resources, and power that you may have been automatically accorded based on aspects of your identity, while others have been overtly or subtly denied them. Our privilege is usually found in the aspects of ourselves that blends in with norms and the people around us. And so it's therefore an aspect of ourselves that's easily forgotten. So most of us have some aspect of our identity that requires little attention to protect ourselves from danger, from discrimination, from foolish humor. It could be that we're able-bodied. It could be that we're heterosexual, that we're cisgender, which means that our gender identity is consistent with our sex assigned at birth. And so if we identify those aspects of ourselves that we have to think the least about, we can identify where we have privilege, and then we can use that privilege as a resource that we deploy for good. And some of the ways that we can use our privilege include things like educating your own community. This is where we use all that information that we've learned through our research, through asking questions, through listening to others, and through seeking out those marginalized voices to help educate others and create more aspiring allies. Another way we can use our privilege is to vocally support the work of colleagues from underrepresented groups and to sponsor marginalized proteges if we're in a position to do so. Privilege can be used to amplify marginalized voices to ensure that they're heard and respected. One way to do this is to invite more colleagues from marginalized groups to gatherings or ask whose perspectives are missing when we're scheduling meetings. Another way is to bring conversations back when someone is interrupted and to give credit to someone else's ideas that you're reiterating or expanding upon. And we can also use our privilege to hold our peers accountable. And certainly one of the ways we can do this is by confronting others. There's also other ways that we can hold people accountable. We can ask questions, we can raise issues, we can add perspectives that are not organically emerging in discussions at work. And all of this basically requires us to be more of an upstander than a bystander. And it requires that we lean into discomfort when we see inequity or injustice.
You know, I couldn't help but think, I don't know, it's maybe disconnected or not, but COVID it must have had a dramatic impact on this whole area because of the interruption of dialogue, discourse, involvement and engagement with our peers and with other people. This has not been good. COVID has not been good for these initiatives.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Bob. Well, certainly it has not. In the beginning, COVID was it seemed like it was going to be the death of DEI because a lot of organizations looked at DEI as a nice to have, not a must have. And so when people were, first not, unsure about what the future looked like, a lot of people cut DEI programs or cut funding to DEI programming until George Floyd happened. And then there was this renewed commitment, an increased commitment around DEI. But, one of the points I want to raise with respect to the pandemic, and we didn't talk about this earlier, and maybe, Lindsey and Leslie can talk about this a little bit, is there's this tendency of people who are members of marginalized communities to do things to assimilate to the majority culture in order to fit in order to succeed, in order to survive. One of those things I can talk about is code switching. And that's when we, change our style of speech, our cadence, our tone, in order to fit in and in order to make the majority culture feel comfortable. But there's also covering and other forms of assimilation. Leslie, did you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I would like to address your question, Bob. I'd like to talk about how COVID has impacted that specifically, but I want to lay the foundation first.
No, I would just add, Lea, and you're right, that as it relates to COVID, part of the issue is for diverse people is that it's hard for people to feel connected and comfortable with them. And so now that you just see people as a bubble on a screen, instead of actually having a chance to see them face to face and connect and understand that you have more in common than you ever would have suspected, can be an issue. But I mean, there's all kinds of ways in which minorities, like Lea said, switch up and change to make other people comfortable. It's as deep as hairstyles. You know, there's all kinds of things. I mean, I today have got my best ethnic hairdo going. And it's just because I just am at a point in my career where I just don't assimilate because I just don't want to. Because it's easier for me to wear my hair like this than to blow it straight and curl it. I happen to be sitting right now in Florida and it's 87 degrees. I would have a hair this big if I had tried to wear it straight. And so I just don't do those things anymore because I don't want to. But I have to be honest.
I think we also call that independent, you know?
It is, but
There
I
you
don't
go.
tell young lawyers the same thing. When young lawyers come to me and they say, do I have to assimilate? I do them a disservice if I say to them, be yourself, be your true authentic self every day. I say to them, think about it. Think about the clients you are serving and think about their comfort level and think about the firm you are at. And if it is a very conservative firm where everybody still dresses in suits and ties and dresses, then you need to be thoughtful about that. Because I don't want to tell you to do anything that's going to put you in a lesser position, because it's not just the content of your character that people are looking at. I would do them a disservice if I didn't tell them the truth, that it's because I'm 20 plus years in practice that I no longer feel the need to assimilate. But I did a whole bunch of assimilating when I was the new kid on the block.
Leslie, to that point, we have a question from Don that's saying, what is the most practical move that an individual can make to combat the weathering effect incurred upon oneself?
So let me, before Lea, I want to jump in on that one because I had a brief response to the earlier piece, to the COVID one, and I want to be sure we talk about something, and that is a huge loss when the world basically shut down was the opportunity for a number of lawyers who were in private firms, in government, who were very much outnumbered, would get together for lunch, would get together after work, would socialize with people with whom they had a lot in common. That got lost. The opportunity to do that got lost when the world separated, because a lot of the self-care that lawyers had came from being able to talk to each other, to ask, what did you do when the following happened? How do you approach this? I was about to jump in somebody's face. I would have been unemployed, and I need to talk to you. So I just wanted to be sure we mentioned that, because that was one of the things that you can't stay on the phone forever talking to folks.
Well, that's where I think we need to maybe go back to a bit, I know, of the remarks that Lea has for us about how organizations can help prevent, these biological, physiological and residual effects that we're talking about today. And that last slide was a good spot, though, Sonia.
Well, the last slide addressed the specific question that was asked about what marginalized groups can do who are actually experiencing these weather effects.
I think this feathers in with the wellness stuff that was being discussed in our first panel.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, it's really important that that people who are experiencing these effects, or people from marginalized communities, are engaging in self-care routines and activities that affirm their culture and that create and maintain healthy boundaries. So, one of them is going to therapy, of course, and there are resources such as Melanin and Mental Health and Therapy for Black Girls that provide a database of culturally competent therapists specifically for Black and Latinx people, and there are other databases for other marginalized groups as well. Journaling is one of my favorites, particularly if you've experienced a microaggression. You can journal to process your thoughts and emotions to make sure you're validating your feelings. Physical activity and practicing good sleep hygiene are really important, because dealing with bias, exclusion, discrimination can be very exhausting. So it's important to get rest and to take care of yourself. To that end, going outside, getting some vitamin D, meditating, eating well and drinking water are also important. And then that last piece about saying no is really important for establishing boundaries. And so, one of the things I would say that people from marginalized communities need to think about saying no to is when they're asked to lead, oftentimes without change in compensation or change in title, ask to lead DEI initiatives. And so if that's something that's beyond your bandwidth, your emotional capacity, or even your skill set, because oftentimes people are asked simply by virtue of the fact that they're a member of a marginalized group, not because they have a background in change management or organizational behavior or any of the other backgrounds or skills that are really necessary to effectively do this work, then feel free to say no. That is an act of self-care. Bob, going back to your question, I was talking about things that individuals could do, not individuals necessarily who are experiencing microaggressions themselves. And I think that we were on slide 38, I'm not sure. Individuals need to own up to their mistakes and accept correction. We all make mistakes. DEI is a journey, and though we may all be at different points on that journey, all of us can and do make mistakes. I make them, and I do this work for a living. So we need to normalize that so that we're better equipped to handle it when we do something wrong, and so we don't do further damage with our reaction. I think most of the time it's not actually the mistake we made, but the reaction to being corrected that causes the problem. So if we get defensive, if we center ourselves in the conversation, usually by talking about our intentions, we can cause additional harm. And so we need to remember that our intent, while it helps us feel better about ourselves and who we are, it doesn't take away the impact of our words and actions, and we're responsible for the impact regardless of what our intentions were. So when we make a mistake and we receive correction, we need to simply apologize without any ifs, ands, or buts, and ask how we can make it right or do things better moving forward. I do want to just briefly mention that while accepting correction gracefully and with humility is critical, it's a passive approach, and a more proactive approach would actually be to seek out feedback from people with marginalized identities with whom we've built trusting relationships rather than solely waiting to be corrected. If we want to skip, we can skip this. I want to get to a couple of.
Yeah, before you do, I think we do have a question, Pam.
Sure.
Well, one of the questions that keeps coming up is for people who are saying who either they have a small practice or even solo practitioners, how can they basically have what's considered to be a diversity program or plan?
Great question.
That's a great question.
One of the things, and then Lea, I'm sorry if I cut you off there, but one of the things that I think is important, and that's why it was important to start by saying, it's one thing to talk about large firms that have people devoted to it. It's another thing. Some of the things that Lea was discussing about the outreach that can be made, the recognition that, I don't have all the answers. We as lawyers, we're taught you got it. You don't have, and we don't want to show that we have any weakness. We don't want to show that we don't know everything. That sort of goes with the degree, I guess. But one of the things that we do want to do is make sure that we do reach out to other people, that we expose ourselves to what others are doing. I am a big believer that the affinity bars don't just have to be members of that same group. I can pay attention to what they're doing, and I can get involved in some of the activity. I'm sorry, Lea and Leslie.
That's okay.
No, I was just going to say that we need to recognize that, there's no one size fits all approach to DEI, and that what, a diversity and inclusion program looks like in Sidley Austin is going to look different than what it's going to look like in a small firm. But we can still have a diversity strategy. And so it's about, what are we doing to, attract, to recruit, retain, recruit and hire, I should say, a diverse pool of candidates. What are we doing to manage that talent so that we're not seeing inequitable progression through the organization? What are we doing to retain that talent? What are we doing to create an environment where everyone feels welcome, valued, respected, heard, and supported? How are we educating employees? Things of that nature. So there can still be a diversity strategy. It just may not be as robust or as large as it may be in a larger law firm.
And how are we utilizing our dollar spend, our vendors, our outside legal spend, the other people who we spend money with? What do those vendors look like? How are they doing with diversity? Do we just go back to the same folks all the time, or are we giving other folks an opportunity at providing services for us in our legal needs? So it's not just the lawyers.
Yeah, well, and that would import then the firms giving serious thought to developing in their purchasing programs, certain set of criteria, right, that a provider has to meet to measure in order. It's not just about the best price, but I must admit that the thoughts occurred to me several times today about what a remarkable intersection there is between all of these issues we're talking about and business and running a business and the travails that go along with that. It's just, it's really stunning. It's not simple.
And it's not easy and it's not simple, but we have to be intentional or it doesn't get done.
Well, if it was easy, you wouldn't be in Florida right now. Sunshine.
That's absolutely right.
I did want to, I know we only have a few minutes left, but we have a question from Jeffrey that says, what is included or expected to be included in a diversity plan? Is weathering to be addressed in such a plan? Or is only hiring something that should be considered?
Well, my part of that was I had a slide that listed 4 things that were part of it that didn't just talk about recruitment, that ended with training in between it. Right. I mean, it had, so there were a number of strategies that are involved. You have to work with people, you mentor people when they are there. You have to keep them, and part of the way that you keep them there is making sure that you hear them, that you find out what their needs are, and make sure that there is an effort to make sure they fit in and are valued. I'm sorry, Leslie and Lea.
Okay.
No, I think that one of the things that I just spoke to was about creating a culture of inclusion. What are we doing to create a culture of inclusion, making sure that all employees feel welcome, valued, respected, heard, and supported. And that is something that would address the weathering effect as well. But I think that if we're going to have a mental health or wellness or well-being strategy within our firms or legal services organizations, it's also important to look at that strategy through a DEI lens and making sure that we're not having a cookie cutter approach to that, and that we are infusing, the unique needs of different populations within our organizations.
Well, folks, as I did with the previous panel, we are on the clock and we do have to wrap up. Lea, I'll give you 1 minute to do your wrap up of your presentation and remarks. If there's something we just haven't gotten to, Sonia can flip to the slide if you want a point to make. And then I'll ask each of you to give a 30 to 60 second wrap up of anything else that you thought would add to the discussion.
Sure. I think that, one of the things that we didn't get a chance to really talk about is what organizations can do. We talked about what people could do at the individual level. And so organizations, need to really be educating their employees on an ongoing basis. This is not a one and done conversation or a once a year conversation for the purposes of CLE. But I also want to highlight that education, in a vacuum is not going to move the needle. Education does not change human behavior. We need to set clear expectations for expected behavior in organizations, educate people so that they have the skills to engage in those behaviors, and then we need to hold people accountable within our organizations. And I think the last, points I would make about what organizations can do is to have a tailored mental health support for underrepresented employee groups that's tailored to their experiences, values, and needs, and to ensure that there's culturally competent therapists on their employee assistance program referral lists who are trained, for example, in things like race-based trauma.
There you go. There you go. Well, Leslie, you're so kind to be part of this today. I was very excited. Our mutual friend, Aurora, I'll give a shout out to Aurora Austriaco, who says hello and was so happy that you were here. And Leslie, any last words of wisdom and good thoughts that you want to add?
So yes, I would just say, besides thank you for having me, I would say continue to be intentional. There is no neutral ground. You are either part of the solution or you are perpetuating the problems that we see with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So go forth and be prosperous.
There you go. Thank you. And Lindsey, you get the middle because we're going to let the lady go last.
What I wanted to just add is I think it's important, and that's why, like Lea and like Leslie, I am just really grateful that you included this as a topic in the presentation, because it's important that DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, not just be a checkbox for discussion, that it be a value, And what we all need to recognize, that's why we started off talking about how it really does, it includes all of us. And therefore, there are a number of things we do. We need to be sure that in order to include everybody, in order to value it, we have to recognize it's important to us as individuals, to our profession, to our clients.
Thank you for that. And Lea, you get the last words of wisdom.
Okay, I think piggybacking on what Leslie said, and I think one of the speakers from the last segment said something to the effect of we all have the ability, and I would add responsibility to do something. And so everybody needs to be an upstander, not a bystander.
There you go. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for not only participating, Lea, Leslie, and Lindsey, and also to our other panelists who have remained with us. Erin and Tracy, I see your names here, and Judge, and to all the thousands of people who've joined today. I hope you got out of this some really valuable information. I certainly did, and I'm grateful for everyone participating and supporting this, and we'll see you again next year. And a special thanks to my executive assistants, Sonia Petrovska and Joe Feldman and Pam Menaker, for really getting this organized. They spend countless hours on putting this together, and they do a great job making us all look good. So thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bob. I'm just going to remind everybody to please be sure to fill out and submit their evaluation forms that can be found by clicking on the handouts print capability tab. Certificates of attendance will be emailed to the email address that you used to register to those of you who qualify for credit in Illinois, Missouri, and Texas. We will get them out to you in the next 2 weeks. Again, like Bob said, I want to thank the panelists on both of our panels. They really worked very hard on this. And thank all of you for attending. We hope to see you again next year. Please be safe. And thank you from all of us here at Clifford Law Offices. Good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.